For the longest time in my life as a student, no one has ever told me anything of value. But these tips that I'm about to share are simple yet invaluable. And honestly, it is so basic that we can divide it into sections, yet it is unbelievably deep and advanced. These are 21 student growth tips you are probably ignoring. And we will start with a paradox that might change the way you think. Let's jump right in. Tip number one is, if you cannot explain it, you don't know it. The idea is that to truly know something, you have to be able to explain it simply as if you are teaching to a child. You have to connect the dots, understand the underlying principles, and organize it in such a way that it is understandable to someone who is completely new to it. This forces us to identify the knowledge gaps we have and look at the material from a fresh perspective. Tip number two, your notes should be a cheat code, not a transcript. We know that note taking is very important, right? So I'm curious, what is your preferred way of note taking? Well, if you ask me, I am a big believer in active engagement with my material. So instead of just jotting down or writing down the facts or the points, it's about creating a dialogue with your material. For example, it can be as simple as asking, what does this mean? And indicating an arrow where the answer is in your material. And now here is where things get really interesting. Tip number three, rereading is a trap. You should do this instead. So instead of rereading, you should use the active recall method. When rereading, we are not actively retrieving the information from our memory, but active recall forces our brains to work harder and retrieve the information without looking at our notes. Thereby, we strengthen this mental muscle, and the more we flex this muscle, the better it gets. Now, tip number four, never start studying without a why. Defining a clear purpose for each study session enhances your focus and your motivation. When you have a clear why, you are more likely to stay focused, engage with the material on a deeper level, thereby enabling you to make more meaningful connections. So it's about giving our learning a sense of direction and purpose. Now let's talk about procrastination. Tip number five. The first 5 minutes are the hardest. Use the starter task trick. This trick is basically all about lowering the barrier to entry and tricking your brain into getting started by just committing to one small step. So, starting a task, even a small one, creates a sense of momentum that can often carry you forward. Once you have broken this initial inertia, it just becomes so much easier to stay engaged and keep going. Now, let us shift our gears and talk about productivity. But before we do that, let us talk about getting the right opportunities. And speaking of finding the right opportunities, if you are a student looking for scholarships or universities abroad, you need help crafting a standout CV, or you want expert feedback on your motivation letter, I offer personalized consulting services to get you ahead. All for a small fee, you can get expert help. All you have to do is visit my website in the description. There, click on book now and you fill the Google Forms, and I will take care of the rest because I have done this before. Now it's my turn to help you out. Now, tip number six. Due dates are lies. Create your own. The idea here is to set fake deadlines ahead of the actual deadlines. Self-imposed deadlines can be a powerful tool for time management and accountability. When you set your own deadlines, it creates a sense of urgency and ownership of the task regardless of the external pressures. We are essentially holding ourselves accountable to a higher standard. Now, here is a tip I think we all need to hear. Tip number 7. Multitasking is a trap. Single task is better. Our brains are not wired for multitasking. When we try to do too many things at once, our attention gets fragmented, our cognitive resources are depleted, the quality of our work suffers. Single tasking, on the other hand, allows us to engage more deeply with the task at hand and produce higher quality work. It's like trying to juggle too many balls at once. Eventually, you're going to drop something. So tip number 8, batching similar tasks saves your brain power. The idea is to group similar tasks together to optimize brain power and maximize flow. So instead of switching back and forth to writing and responding emails, I would rather do all of my writing tasks first and then move on to emails and so on. By grouping these similar tasks together, you can minimize the mental switching cost and maintain a more focused and productive workflow. Now, tip number 9. The 2-minute rule ends procrastination. If something takes less than 2 minutes, just do it immediately. Just do it. And why is this seemingly simple rule so effective? Because it prevents those small tasks from accumulating over time and creating a sense of overwhelm. And when we tackle them right away, we free up mental space for more demanding tasks. It's like a simple dopamine hit for our brains. And speaking of managing our time effectively, tip number 10. Time blocking is the ultimate productivity hack. This is a classic. Time blocking is about scheduling dedicated time for specific tasks and treating them like appointments we cannot miss. But how can we make time blocking work for our unique schedules and work styles? Time blocking is all about flexibility. You can customize it to fit your needs and preferences. Some people prefer hourly blocks of time, while some people prefer 10-minute work and 5-minute break, and so on. So it's not a one-size-fits-all purpose. It's about creating something that works for you. Now, let's talk about energy. Tip number 11. Sleep is a cheat code for memory. It's not just about feeling rested. It's about giving our brains the time they need to process and store information. While we sleep, our brains are busy consolidating, organizing, and strengthening those neural connections, essentially hitting the save button on all of the new information we learn. That's why sleep is very crucial. Tip number 12. Distraction fixes mental clutter. Now wait, hear me out first. Even a short walk outside can clear your mental clutter and help you come up with new ideas. I have personally experienced this walking magic myself. Walking increases our blood flow and oxygen to the brain, thereby enhancing our cognitive function. It also releases endorphins. These feel-good hormones can reduce stress and improve mood, and thereby boosting our mental clarity. Okay, let's move on to tip number 13. Your food is your focus. Now let's walk to our kitchen because there is a connection between the food we eat and how we think. You see, whole unprocessed foods like fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, and healthy fats can provide sustained energy, stabilize our blood sugar levels, overall improve our brain health. So, good food is a fuel, so eat good food. Now, tip number 14. Hydration is a fuel for the brain. Think of it this way. A car needs fuel to run smoothly, right? Same way, our brains need adequate hydration to function optimally. We already know that 1/3 of our human body is made up of water, right? Also, our brains are made up of almost 80% water. So even a slight dehydration can lead to fatigue, headaches, difficulty concentrating, and even mood swings. So the message is clear. Drink up. Tip number 15. The sleep revenge cycle is ruining us. SRC is that tendency to sacrifice sleep for leisure activities, especially screen time. Yes, we have all been there. While it might feel like we are reclaiming our free time by staying up late, we often end up paying the price the next day with decreased energy, focus, and productivity, right? It's a short-term gain for a long-term loss. So the key is to prioritize sleep and create healthy boundaries around screen time. Now let's dive onto the tips that focus on the mindset, which is arguably as important as any practical strategy. So, tip number 16. If you always feel behind, you are doing it right. Embrace the feeling of being behind. I'll admit this sounds a bit counterintuitive, but how do we turn this feeling of behindness into something positive? It's all about perspective. When we are constantly striving to learn, grow, and achieve more in life, it's natural to feel like you are always trying to catch up to things, right? But instead of thinking this as a negative, I want you to take it as an evidence to see how far we have come and get excited for the journey ahead. See, it's all about shifting the mindset and the perspective. And speaking of perspective, tip number 17 introduces a simple yet effective technique for reducing stress. So, tip number 17, zoom out, because 99% of your stress won't matter in 5 years. The idea is to ask yourself, will this even matter in the next 5 years? This is a great way to gain clarity and put things into perspective, especially when you are stressed and overwhelmed. When we zoom out and look at the bigger picture, we often realize that our daily stressors are just temporary blips on the radars of our life. They might feel significant in the moment, but when we look at the grand scheme of things, they are unlikely to have a lasting impact. So, tip number 18, the effort paradox. You have to look stupid before you get smart. I think we often let the fear of failure hold us back from trying something new and embracing changes in our life. It's so much easier to stay in our comfort zones where we know we can succeed, but that also limits our growth potential, right? When we embrace the effort paradox, we recognize that mistakes and failures are inevitable and they are an invaluable part of the learning process. It's like that famous Thomas Edison quote, "I have not failed. I just found 10,000 ways that won't work." Now, tip number 19, track your small wins. They compound. It's easy to get caught up in the big goals and overlook the small achievements we have along the way. But why is it so important to celebrate these seemingly insignificant and small wins? It's because our brains are wired to respond to rewards. Right, when we celebrate our small wins, no matter how seemingly insignificant, we reinforce those positive behaviors and create a sense of momentum that fuels our motivation to keep going. It's like giving a little pat on our backs and telling ourselves that you did well, keep on going. And speaking of positive reinforcement, tip number 20, asking questions as a means of reasoning and not stupidity. I think there is a societal stigma around asking questions, especially in class, to being perceived as stupid, especially asking basic questions, because we don't want to appear ignorant or uninformed, right? And sometimes asking a question can help us realize that we did not understand something as well as we thought we did. But the truth is, every question is an opportunity for learning and growth, both for the asker, the responder, and for the listeners. Sometimes the simplest questions can lead to the most profound insights. And now for the final tip. It's about perspective. Tip number 21. Nobody cares how you start, only how you finish. Success is often a marathon and not a sprint. So here is my advice for staying motivated and persistent when the going gets tough. Remember your why. Why did you embark on this journey in the first place? What are you hoping to achieve? Connect with all of these questions on a deeper level, and I promise you, this will always make you keep on going forward. It's all about finding that inner drive and remembering why we set out on this path in the first place. But in the end, students focus on grades beyond anything else, taking one very important factor out of the equation of learning a few basic skills. So here are 5 skills that actually matter in college, but no one teaches you. Check it out.